Clapton's racist comments prompted the Rock Against Racism movement. Clapton's racist outburst earned him a rather unsavory reputation among music lovers, and fellow musicians took note. In 1978, the first Rock Against Racism Carnival was held in East London and featured black and white musicians playing together in direct response to Clapton's bigoted comments. The event was spearheaded at the grassroots level and brought in members of The Clash, as well as groups like The Specials and singers like Tom Robinson. Rock Against Racism joined forces with anti-Nazi groups in England that were protesting National Front. Clapton admitted he was a semi-racist at the time of his rant. Speaking in 2018, Clapton says he was disgusted with himself for his chauvinistic and fascistic comments on stage. Recalling that period in his life, Clapton continued, "I sabotaged everything I got involved with. I was so ashamed of who I was, a kind of semi-racist, which didn't make sense. Half of my friends were black, I dated a black woman, and I championed black music." Clapton's addiction made him abusive and unpredictable. Drummer Jamie Oldacre, who played with Clapton from '74 to '80, recalls of the band's 1974 tour. Clapton was fragile. "I'm not sure whether he was really aware of anything around him, or what is going on around him." Clapton himself said to me, "Alcohol was far more dangerous than heroin." Guitarist George Terry remembers Clapton drinking entire bottles of cognac before lunch. Drinking so heavily it seemed like he had a death wish. Clapton's drinking made him difficult to be around and sometimes violent. "Everyone used to walk around me on eggshells. They didn't know if I was going to be angry or whatever. When I'd come back from the pub, I could come back happy, or I could come back and smash the place up," Clapton later explained to the New York Post. Clapton admitted to raping his wife, Pattie Boyd, during this period. "There were times when I took sex with my wife by force and thought that was my entitlement. I had absolutely no concern for other people." Pattie Boyd has also spoken out about their relationship, stating she would pray he would pass out when he came to bed and not try to touch me. Clapton's indebtedness to international, multicultural musical traditions makes his tirade all the more unexpected. Clapton's racist remarks are particularly startling considered in the context of the music for which he's most well known. Like nearly all British musicians of his generation, Clapton was most heavily inspired by the blues, a form of American folk music created primarily by African American musicians. The history of blues is more racially complicated than most simplistic overviews make it out to be. Over the years, in various bands and solo projects, Clapton has covered a number of blues songs by black musicians. In an interview from 1968, Clapton remarked, "All the Indian musicians I've heard and all the blues musicians I've heard have influenced me." His 1974 hit "I Shot the Sheriff" was a Bob Marley cover. Marley lived in London in the early 1970s and heavily influenced the music scene there. The UK reggae underground had a major impact on punk bands like The Clash, and is responsible for Led Zeppelin's lilting Ditty Dire Maker. Clapton was out of his head on drugs in the 70s, spending as much as $0 a week on heroin. Eric Clapton suffered serious substance abuse problems throughout the 1970s. In his 2007 autobiography, he admitted to spending about $8,000, or $0, a week on cocaine. Clapton apparently adjusted this figure for inflation. A piece from Rolling Stone on Derek and the Dominoes, Clapton's early 1970s supergroup, with Duane Allman, reads, "We weren't doing a bunch of drugs during our recording. But if you're drinking whiskey and snorting cocaine and heroin, it's still going to be in your system tomorrow," recalls former bandmate Bobby Whitlock. The situation was so dire, label boss Amit Ertegun tried to intervene. He didn't want Eric to go down that road, Whitlock says. But he did. He was already on the way. You can't stop a junkie. Only death stops a junkie. Ultimately, the band's partying wasn't sustainable, and the clip ends with Whitlock describing Derek and the Dominoes' failed attempted to make a follow-up, and the drug-induced paranoia that led to the group's demise. Even after Clapton kicked hard drugs, he was dependent on alcohol. He purportedly drank 2 bottles of liquor a day at the height of his alcoholism, and once performed an entire concert lying down because he was too drunk to stand. Looking back on those years, Clapton writes, "The only reason that I didn't commit suicide was the fact that I knew I wouldn't be able to drink anymore if I was dead." The rise of the National Front and extreme conservatism in Britain served as the setting for the Outburst. Fully understanding the context of what Clapton said, and the political climate in which Powell existed, requires at least cursory information on a political party called National Front, not to be confused with the French party of the same name. The National Front formed at some point in the mid to late 1960s, some say 1966, others 1967, when a handful of men involved in extreme right English politics decided to unite a number of small groups with similar goals into a political front, hence the name. An F platform included proposals to ban all immigration to Britain and to send all non-white immigrants back to their ancestral nations. The party was anti-communist and supported white governments in former African colonies settled by Europeans. Richard C. Thurlow, author of Fascism in Britain, A History 1918-1985, calls the formation of the National Front the most significant event on the radical right and fascist fringe of British politics in the second half of the 20th century. In the 1970s, as the British economy stagnated and countless Britons were out of work, the National Front gained prominence by inflaming fears of immigrants arriving in droves, populating entire towns and cities, and taking what precious little work existed from the locals. This was happening. A new radical left, associated in part with the burgeoning punk rock scene, also emerged, and violent clashes between the far right and far left, in which the police were also usually involved, erupted in cities throughout Britain. It was in this climate that Clapton went on his racist rant. Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech influenced Clapton's rant and inflamed xenophobia in Britain. Clapton stopped a concert to go on a racist rant about how England was becoming a black colony.
Hey guys, thank you so much for the support and likes and comments down below, and also thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to see you in the next video. Then take care, bye.